Bright studio lights illuminated the set of The View, its energy a mix of afternoon talk and political theatrics. Karoline Leavitt stood backstage, poised in a fitted navy blazer, her blonde hair swept back neatly. She was calm, collected, and mentally prepared. Inside, Whoopi Goldberg, midway through her monologue, noticed Karoline waiting. She paused, eyes narrowing. "Let's bring her in," she announced to the host. Karoline walked out with confidence, but laughter bubbled from the audience as Whoopi led her to a seat between her and another panelist. Soon, Whoopi leaned forward, her tone clipped. "Karoline, nice to have you. Just a heads up, this is not a fan club. We don't do pristine optics here, we do tough questions." Karoline nodded, unmoved. She sat upright, crossed her legs, and fixed her gaze on Whoopi. Whoopi smirked. "What's next, law school? I can't tell if you're qualified or just a debutante with an accent." A murmur crept through the audience. But Karoline's composure never wavered, her voice quiet but firm. "Whoopi, you can question my background, but not my resolve." The studio shifted. The audience hushed. Even the other panelists blinked. Whoopi's smile flickered, replaced by a cold edge. "Is that defiance I hear?" Before Karoline could respond, Whoopi turned sharply and said, "Fine. I don't need your resolve. Security, escort her out." The word security echoed through the silent room. Karoline sat still, her cross-shaped pendant tucked beneath her blouse. She met Whoopi's gaze calmly as two security guards stood and began walking toward her. That was the moment the real fight began. The studio audience froze, unsure whether this was part of the show or a live meltdown unfolding before them. The two security guards, both in black polos with earpieces, began approaching Karoline. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, clearly expecting her to leave quietly. A few nervous laughs echoed, but the tension drowned them. Karoline didn't move. Instead, she slowly reached into her bag, pulling out a folded white paper with the official White House Communications Office header. She placed it on the table in full view of the camera and said calmly, without raising her voice, "I'm here by official invitation as a federal media liaison. Removing me could be considered unlawful interference." Whoopi blinked. "That's cute," she muttered. But Karoline wasn't bluffing. The guards hesitated. One looked toward a stage manager, silently asking, "Do we proceed?" Karoline stood, not out of fear, but control. She adjusted her blazer, stepped away from the table, and addressed the audience directly. "You were promised a debate. Instead, you're watching a woman try to silence another for disagreeing." Gasps erupted. Phones came out. The audience was no longer neutral. Karoline turned back to Whoopi. "You didn't call security because I was disrespectful. You called because I wouldn't play your narrative." Whoopi's face hardened, but her silence said more than any rebuttal could. Even Sunny Hostin leaned away in her chair, clearly not wanting to get caught in the crossfire. The guards stopped in their tracks. One of them leaned in and whispered to Karoline, "Do you want to step backstage for your safety?" She looked him in the eye and replied, "My safety isn't the problem. Silencing truth is." At that moment, the audience burst into applause, hesitant at first, then louder. Whoopi's dominance had cracked. Karoline wasn't going anywhere. The applause didn't die down quickly. It grew louder, not because everyone agreed with Karoline's politics, but because they recognized courage. Whoopi forced a laugh, trying to regain control. "Oh please," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't act like you're the hero here. You walked in with a script and a cross-thinking that makes you bulletproof." Karoline tilted her head. "No, Whoopi. I walked in thinking this was a conversation. But you wanted a circus." Whoopi tried to speak, but Karoline cut her off, not with volume, but with precision. "You don't need to agree with my beliefs. But when you call security on someone for disagreeing with you, on national television, you prove exactly why people are tired of your side pretending to be tolerant." The studio's lighting suddenly felt hotter. The other panelists looked uneasy. Joy Behar whispered into her mic, "She's steamrolling this whole thing." Karoline turned toward the camera, locking eyes with the lens like a prosecutor in closing argument. "We're at a point where civility has been replaced with censorship. When someone can't win with logic, they resort to labels, or in this case, security." The audience responded with scattered cheers. Phones were up, recording every word. Backstage, a producer yelled, "Cut to commercial," but the director shook his head. This was going viral in real time. Whoopi shifted in her seat, now visibly rattled. "You want a debate?" Karoline continued. "Let's debate. But if your first move is to throw me out, then maybe you weren't ready to have one." The guards stepped back. Whoopi had called them. But Karoline had just made them irrelevant. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation had already hit X, formerly Twitter. The hashtags were erupting. Hashtag The View Meltdown. Hashtag Karoline vs. Whoopi. Hashtag Call Security Backfired. Thousands were already weighing in. Some praised Karoline's composure, others mocked the fact that Whoopi, a woman who once said, "We need to talk, not yell," had gone straight to security. Inside the studio, the energy had flipped. Karoline leaned forward at the table again, now uninterrupted. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult anyone. But because I don't parrot your politics, I'm seen as a threat? That's not progress. That's paranoia." Whoopi opened her mouth, but the audience clapped. Again. Not raucously, but enough to make interruption impossible. A producer signaled Joy Behar to pivot the conversation. "Karoline, you say you're not trying to provoke, but you wear your faith, your ideology, your agenda, like a costume. You knew this would go viral." Karoline nodded calmly. "You're right. I knew if I walked in here and told the truth, you'd try to throw me out. That is viral. Because it reveals something deeper. Your side isn't afraid of disrespect. You're afraid of dissent." The silence was surgical. Karoline turned slightly, addressing not just the table but the millions who would soon watch the moment online. "If you have to silence people to win, maybe your ideas aren't as strong as you think." Even a few audience members who'd come in skeptical were now nodding. Joy glanced nervously at Whoopi, but Whoopi didn't speak. Her authority, so often unchallenged, was unraveling by the second. Backstage, a producer muttered, "This is the clip that's going to headline Fox, Newsmax, maybe even CNN." By the time The View went off air, the internet had already crowned a winner. Clips of Karoline calmly holding her ground while security hesitated had reached 2 million views in under an hour. Conservative influencers praised her poise, independents called out The View for authoritarian theatrics. Even liberal commentators whispered privately, that did not go well for Whoopi. Meanwhile, backstage was chaos. Producers barked into headsets. Legal advisors huddled in corners. One exec muttered, "Did she really pull a federal credential live on camera?" Another replied, "Worse, she used it correctly." Whoopi Goldberg sat in her dressing room, staring at her reflection. For the first time in years, the smug certainty in her eyes was gone. A young assistant knocked timidly. Whoopi, we're trending. But it's not good." Whoopi didn't answer. Her mind spun with what had happened. She'd expected a quick knockout. A staged ejection. A social media win. Instead, she got buried. And not just by Karoline's words, by her calm. Her control. Her refusal to panic. Down the hall, Karoline stood with her team, already fielding calls from producers, journalists, and even one major podcast. Her husband had texted her a screenshot. "You broke the internet." Karoline responded with a simple photo of her press badge and the words, "Not done yet." On X, one of the top tweets read, "When you call security on a guest with a brain sharper than yours, expect consequences." Karoline didn't just survive, she dominated. A late-night host even joked, Whoopi tried to cancel someone mid-interview and ended up canceling herself. The tide had turned. And Karoline didn't even raise her voice. Karoline's inbox was overflowing. Fox News wanted her for a primetime segment, 2 major podcasts had already booked her, and her team was fielding offers from event organizers coast to coast. She hadn't expected to trend that day. She hadn't come to The View to start a fight. But now that the fight came to her, she made sure her counterpunch landed with precision. That evening, Karoline stepped into a small studio in D.C. to do a satellite interview with Tucker Carlson. As the camera lights warmed her face, she smiled calmly, the silver cross on her collar visible once more. "I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to insult," she said, responding to Tucker's first question. "All I had to do was hold my ground, and that's apparently enough to cause panic these days." Tucker smirked. "They tried to send security after you." "They did. And I told them exactly what I tell every American, your values aren't a costume. They're your armor." Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, The View's producers were in full PR mode. Whoopi had cancelled her scheduled appearance on a late-night talk show, citing fatigue. But insiders knew, she didn't want to answer questions. The next morning, the ratings report dropped, and it was brutal. The View's confrontation segment with Karoline had shattered their weekly numbers, but not in the way they'd hoped. Viewers weren't celebrating the co-hosts. They were rallying behind the guest who had walked into enemy territory and left stronger. A national poll circulated online. Who handled themselves better during the clash? Karoline Leavitt, 78%. Whoopi Goldberg, 12%. Undecided, 10%. Whoopi's team begged her to release a statement. She refused. But Karoline? She was just getting started. Karoline hadn't returned to her apartment since the taping. Instead, she was stationed at a media war room in D.C., seated beside a whiteboard already filled with talking points, booking schedules, and viral quote snapshots. The energy was electric, not chaotic, but precise, focused. "We're not letting this die in 24 hours, said her communications director, sliding her a new poll. 63% of independent voters said they now viewed Karoline as fearless. 71% said Whoopi Goldberg had abused her platform. Karoline studied the numbers in silence, then replied, "I don't want applause. I want accountability." She didn't just mean for Whoopi. She meant for everyone like her, legacy voices who bullied dissent, who used their status to silence anyone outside the ideological script. And now America had seen it happen in real time. By midday, she was booked for a town hall in Michigan. At 4 p.m., she was trending #1 on YouTube for a fiery clip where she declared, "Security isn't a weapon for discomfort. It's a tool for safety. If you feel unsafe around free speech, maybe you shouldn't be in public debate." Meanwhile, the View team was falling apart behind the scenes. Staffers leaked to journalists. One anonymously wrote to Politico, "We've all watched Whoopi get meaner every year. But this time, she lost. And everyone saw it." Whoopi sat in her penthouse, watching the clip again and again. Replaying that moment she called for security, and how they froze. How they looked to her for justification. How Karoline looked back at them, not with fear, but with authority. She'd misjudged her opponent. Karoline wasn't a MAGA mouthpiece. She wasn't some intern with a talking point list. She was a tactician with a spine of steel, and now, a platform with teeth. At 7 p.m., Karoline stepped out onto the stage at the Michigan Town Hall. 600 people packed the auditorium. Hundreds more watched on a live stream. She held up her phone, showing the clip of Whoopi waving security forward. "This," she said, her voice unwavering, "is what censorship looks like. But I won't be silenced, and neither will you." The room erupted. Not because of political alignment. Because of resonance. Because they saw themselves, their fear of being shut down, in her moment. Karoline didn't just win a debate. She sparked a shift. The ripple effects were no longer virtual, they were tangible. By Friday morning, Karoline Leavitt's confrontation with Whoopi had been viewed over 18 million times across all platforms. Every major news outlet, whether left or right, had picked it up. And the headline was always some version of "Security called. Karoline stayed. Whoopi fumbled." Inside ABC's New York headquarters, a closed-door emergency meeting was underway. Senior producers, legal advisors, and PR heads sat grim-faced, eyes fixed on a projection of real-time social sentiment graphs. The red line, Whoopi's negative perception, had spiked off the chart. One exec exhaled. "We've had controversial segments before, but this isn't controversy. This is backlash." And it wasn't just about the ratings anymore, it was about credibility. Whoopi's silence in the days following the incident only fueled the fire. Every hour she refused to acknowledge the mistake, another influencer posted the clip with commentary. This is what they mean by tolerance. Dragging out security because someone believes in faith, country, and the Constitution? Karoline, meanwhile, was becoming a political phenomenon. Not just within MAGA circles, but among independents and even liberal Gen Z creators who respected how she handled herself. On Saturday morning, she was invited to speak at the National Free Speech Forum in Dallas. Her flight was met by a crowd holding homemade signs. "Security can't silence truth. Karoline equals courage. #Stand with Karoline." As she stepped on stage, she didn't bask in applause, she opened with facts. "Over the past 48 hours, I've received thousands of messages. People who've been silenced in classrooms, workplaces, and yes, even in studios like The View. This isn't about me versus Whoopi. This is about you versus a culture of fear." In the green room afterward, her phone buzzed. A text from a senior GOP strategist. "You're not a guest anymore. You're a movement." Back in New York, Whoopi sat across from a PR advisor who didn't mince words. "Either you apologize, or you become the story that sinks the show." She stayed quiet. But it was too late, the storm had already rewritten the script. Karoline wasn't just making headlines anymore. She was becoming the headline. Sunday morning. Meet the Press opened with her clip. Then Face the Nation. Then CNN, reluctantly, aired a segment titled, "From Silenced Guest to Free Speech Icon, Who is Karoline Leavitt?" By noon, she was on the front page of the New York Post with the headline, "Newspaper, they tried to throw her out, now she's leading the conversation." In conservative circles, she was hailed as the next firebrand. But what surprised even Karoline was the uptick in progressive voices defending her. A viral tweet from a Gen Z liberal podcaster read, "You don't have to agree with Karoline Leavitt to see what happened to her was censorship, plain and simple." Meanwhile, The View was in chaos. 2 advertisers pulled sponsorship. An internal HR complaint was filed, not by Karoline, but by a junior producer who felt pressured to remain silent during the incident. Whoopi's team tried to get ahead of it. A brief statement was drafted. "Tensions run high in political debate. We regret how things escalated." But Karoline's supporters weren't having it. They flooded X with, "She didn't escalate. She endured. She stood." They panicked. Behind closed doors, Whoopi met with ABC executives. Her tone was defensive. "I've been doing this show longer than she's been alive," she snapped. "And that's exactly why you should have known better," one exec replied coldly. Karoline, on the other hand, was planning something bigger. That evening, during a live-stream Q&A, she dropped a bombshell. "I've been approached to lead a national initiative on viewpoint diversity in media. We're calling it Project Mike, because no one gets theirs taken away. The chat exploded. Speech balloon, yes. Speech balloon, lead the charge, Karoline. Speech balloon, make them all regret it. She ended the stream with a message, not to Whoopi, but to the millions watching. If you've ever been told to sit down, shut up, or walk out for what you believe, know this: I didn't walk. I spoke. And now we're louder than ever. The following Monday, ABC issued an internal memo. Effective immediately, on-air talent must undergo viewpoint diversity and de-escalation training. The word was clear: damage control. But outside the network walls, Karoline Leavitt's impact had already eclipsed broadcast boundaries. Her town hall footage had hit 25 million views. Congressional leaders were now publicly praising her poise, including some from the other side of the aisle. That morning, she stood on the Capitol steps for a press conference. This isn't about left versus right. It's about the freedom to speak, without needing permission from television hosts. The crowd erupted in cheers. From her Manhattan apartment, Whoopi watched in silence. No producers. No cameras. Just the sound of Karoline's voice echoing through the flat screen. Her phone buzzed again. Another sponsor gone. She opened her email. One subject line caught her eye. Orange circle, HR investigation closure, recommendation, on-air suspension. She froze. For the first time in over a decade, Whoopi Goldberg was being taken off the air. Meanwhile, Karoline received a call from Speaker Pro Tem. You have momentum. If you want to testify before the House Committee on Media Fairness, we'll clear a chair for you. She accepted. At the hearing, dressed in her iconic navy blue blazer, Karoline delivered a powerful statement. I was called names. I was threatened with removal. But I didn't back down. Not because I wanted to win a moment, but because Americans lose far more than that when we let fear decide who gets to speak. Her words were clipped, posted, replayed. Hashtag Karoline testifies. Hashtag Project Mike. Hashtag Whoopi suspended. They all trended. And back at ABC, executives gathered again. We thought we could contain this. We underestimated her. Whoopi issued a rare statement the next day. I regret how I handled the situation. I should have listened instead of ordered. To Karoline, and to our viewers, I'm sorry. Karoline didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her message was already framed, in headlines, hashtags, and the minds of millions. And in her office, beneath the Project Mike banner, the security footage from that day played on loop. Not as a warning, but as a beginning. She watched herself standing her ground, calm and unshaken, while two guards hesitated, and a host crumbled. Because they didn't just try to remove her from a room. They handed her the mic. They called security. They tried to silence her. They thought power came from a chair, a title, a mic. But Karoline showed the world, true power comes from standing, not sitting. From truth, not applause. In that studio, she wasn't just a guest. She became a voice for millions who had been shut down, shut out, or told to shut up. She didn't flinch. She didn't fold. She didn't fight with fists, she fought with facts. And when they told her to leave, she gave them something they'll never forget. A reason to remember her name. Karoline Leavitt didn't just win an argument. She rewrote the rules of engagement. Because when the cameras roll and the crowd falls silent, some voices echo louder than a network ever could.